and I was talking with Barry at Exactone a couple weeks ago when I was in Nashville. And, he's like, man, there's just something to be said about like Switchcraft. Like, yeah, it's not the smallest. And yeah, it's like not the sexiest new kid on the block. But like, if you build a rig with right angle, what is it? What is the designation? It's like 280s or whatever it is.
Yeah.
You're probably never going to have a failure that's related to the plug.
Yeah.
And I was kind of like, yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yep.
So I think that this is all a great way to segue into the fact that we are actually on Chairman of the Board's podcast, and we are actually a Chairman short today, as you may notice if you're viewing on YouTube and not listening, as some of you may be on your commutes or wherever it is that you listen to the podcast. And I think we can talk about this more because I don't know that what our topic today is going to fill up the entirety of the podcast. But I think as far as, new directions, maybe we have a topic we sit on for a little bit and then we get into assorted things following that. But the topic today that I wanted to bring to the table, Grant, since it's just you and I and Brian, is selfishly vacationing.
He's a bit of a jerk.
Yeah.
We were all thinking it. You weren't going to say it, but he's a jerk.
Yeah. He selfishly decided to go on vacation with his family, and I don't think anything is more selfish than that. But nevertheless, we're going to hold down the fort in his absence. And the thing that I was struck by that kind of came to me this week, Grant, was the idea of when people talk about space-saving measures on their pedal boards. And I think this is invariably something that everybody comes to us with some desire to fit more in less space.
Mm-hmm.
Is the idea of miniature pedals, and I'm going to hold one up for those of you who are watching, which is I'm holding up an MXR BC 108 fuzz. It's a mini version, which I should say as an aside is an excellent fuzz pedal in a miniature compact format. And the person that introduced me to this is none other than the great session musician Paul Jackson Jr., because it's one of few fuzzes that seems to work okay with a wireless without having to do external treatments like
so
our friends
buffer-friendly.
over. Yes, and I don't know if it was explicitly built for that purpose, but it does seem to affect it very little as a consequence of running low impedance into it, which is not true of most fuzz faces. It even has a little buffer push button on here.
Oh, cool. I'm going to need to check this out.
Yeah, and so not only, if you celebrate space-saving pedals, this one, space-saving or not, is excellent. And if you're in that fuzz face, that silicon fuzz face style sound, the mini fuzzes are kind of awkward from Dunlop that are in the kind of more traditional fuzz face style enclosure that's shrunken down. If you want something that is a fuzz face adjacent sound, but is compact and sounds great, and you could use it with your wireless or in your rack, where you have a buffer, let's say, going into this, really great. But getting back to the topic, a lot of people talk about the space saving.
Oh my gosh, we can't
space
talk.
Saving safe spaces. We're in California. I hear that word a lot. And I think that there's sort of a misnomer that when you're using something this size, that it actually is a significant space-saving measure. But before I go into the reasons why I think this, I'm curious if you have any sort of preamble around this, Grant. Because, again, I'm sure that if I'm hearing it, you must be really hearing it, being that you're one of the preeminent rig-building establishments in the United States of America, and I should say North America, given that you're in Vancouver, Canada.
I was thinking a lot about this. I was doing even some research into this. Like, why do I feel this way about mini pedals? And I have to give this a big, caveat. I avoid mini pedals. unless it's a tuner, I avoid them. And I was trying to think, like, why do I avoid mini pedals? I have no good reason. I just don't think they're as good as the bigger pedals. Again, for no good reason. And so I was doing research, into which I kind of already have thoughts and I've researched in the past, but bigger pedals, older ones typically using through hole parts versus newer pedals being very much SMT, surface mount parts, which allows you to use smaller components, get a pedal smaller if that's your goal, for a much more reliable, ultimately better product. And I know all this, and I still look at mini pedals as being inferior. And I have no good reason for it. So I went next door. I have a buddy who's also a guitar player, very much a tone snob. I jokingly told him that going into the podcast, I would refer to him as my tone guru because I go to him for a lot of tonal questions. And I asked him without much context, like, what do you think about mini pedals? Would you ever use them on your board? Any thoughts about them? He's like, they aren't as good. And so I asked, like, why aren't they as good? It's like, I don't know. They just aren't as good. They don't sound as good and they aren't as good quality. They're cheap. And he just listed off all these things that I kind of feel, but also have no real evidence for. And so all this to say, I do like the idea of mini pedals. For some reason, I'm averse to them. I do think that they can save space in certain contexts, but by no means in every context. And obviously that's what we're going to chat about today is some of the specifics. But yeah, I think overall, I don't know if you would, if any of that would resonate with you, Mason, or if you're just going to, say, like I called Brian a jerk. Grant, you're being a tone jerk for no good reason. I'm open, I'm vulnerable, I'm ready to be, told off. But yeah, I'll throw it back to you for the telling off.
I think we're in pretty much agreement here, and I think the principal idea is that if you have a mini pedal like the one I'm holding up, and then you have another mini pedal next to it, I don't know that you're getting any real space savings for a couple of reasons. One is that when you put jacks in, as I have here,
yep,
and then you put in a DC jack, which I have in here, you've now expanded the size on three planes, left and right,
jacks.
So the left side, the right side. I guess it'd be two planes, horizontal and vertical. But you've got both jacks on both sides now, which extend the width. And then you have another jack for DC that's expanding how deep the pedal is. And if you're comparing it to, let's say, something that's like a Phase 90 style enclosure that has top jacks, which is like a Hammond 1590B, or you have something like what Grant's holding up, a Vertex Boost, or a prototype that I'm holding up of another pedal, and you start to compare these, you're like, well, wow, this thing is now practically, it's actually slightly wider than the pedal now that there are jacks on. I'm trying to get a nice angle here for people to see that.
I have the same here. I have the Ibanez, as you like to call it, Mason,
Ibanez,
with square plugs, or sorry, not square plugs, upgraded version, Evidence Audio ESP plugs, which are
another example
plugs.
of super low profile. Yeah.
And it is definitely, it's almost, I would say, almost half an inch wider, as in the mini pedal is half an inch wider.
I'm going to just take out my measuring tape here. So I have on the mini fuzz, and if I were to invert this in such a way, let me do it this way so that it's not offensive to the viewer.
I'm going to guess that you're going to go imperial. For all of our metric countries, I will go metric with my Ibanez. And with jacks, I have 70 millimeters wide.
I have 2.5 inches wide.
And on the top mount jack,
Vertex Boost is 2.25.
57 millimeters wide.
All right. So I have 2.25 inches. Yeah.
So what was the difference? What was the difference width-wise?
So 2.5 with jacks on the MXR mini pedal, which is fairly representative of any mini sort of pedal. And then this is 2.25, which is the same size as the Vertex Boost. Yeah, so it's a 1/4 inch difference in width.
Now to play devil's advocate, depth-wise, the mini is smaller, even with DC.
So right now on this guy, if I'm measuring from the top of the jack, it's about 4 1/8.
Which metric-wise, we're at 10.5 centimeters.
4 1/8, and this guy is 5. So it is deeper.
I got 12.5 centimeters on the top mount jack, normal size pedal, Vertex Boost. So 2 centimeters for me, for my example. But I will say, again, playing devil's advocate, there are certain times, if you have a flat surface you're putting a mini pedal up against, you will not save space width-wise in comparison to a top mount. But if you have multiple mini pedals where the input jack is low and the output jack is high, then the jacks, assuming they aren't going to hit, if you're using low profile jacks that are quite small, not taking up tons of space, then the pedals should slot into each other and save you space. But you're then going to run into a new issue. If you are not using a switcher, the foot switches are going to be so close together that using these pedals is going to be tricky. You're going to need some stilettos. Let's just call it what it is. We're going to need a new sponsor for the show.
Or a peg leg, if you're into that.
For all those pirate rockers out there.
Right. Yeah, if you have a peg, you're gonna love mini pedals because it's gonna really line up closely. But the challenge, as Grant just illuminated, is that unless you have a peg leg or you've instituted some sort of foot binding as kind of a ritualistic thing that you're into, and if you are, God bless.
Maybe you're using rollerblades. And you just roll that foot switch up,
That it's actually really impractical unless, as Grant said, you have a switcher and there's some remote way to be able to control the on-off function so that you don't really need to be able to have the foot switch in an accessible location in proximity to other things. But just to recap, and again, Grant was using the Vertex Boost. This is the same enclosure. This is another prototype that I'm working on. Representative
You're just going to keep teasing us, aren't you?
Of what you would find in a normal Hammond 1590, I guess would it be 1590B or BB?
I got a measurement, so I got Soul Food. I'll tell you if it's the same width as your Vertex. 6 centimeters on the 90B and like a millimeter shy of 60 millimeters. So yeah, they're essentially the same
They're
width.
essentially the same. I mean, ours has like a slant to it, which is a little bit different. But that being said, principally you could compare this to any of the Hammond 1590s. Ours are not those, stamped out, die cast cases. These are bent metal or bent steel in this case. But I think it's pretty representative. And so I think that what we've seen is so far is that if you use this style, and I'm holding up again my enclosure representative of like a MXR style size, this is, what do we say, 1/4 of an inch narrower, but it is slightly deeper. I don't get so concerned about depth though, typically. Usually the variable that I'm working against is width when we're dealing with the pedalboard. So I don't usually, if it's a difference of, 5/8, 6/8, something like that, not such a big deal to deal with in terms of front to back. Where it becomes problematic is that side to side. And I just think that if you're using mini pedals specifically because you think that they're space saving, you're going to run into a lot of problems. You're not going to be able to set them really close to each other without really being able to step on them and be able to separate one foot switch from the other any more than you would be if you just used top jacks and you sacrificed, let's say, less than an inch extra in depth, but less in terms of the width. I just think that it's a misnomer. I think they were brilliant when like Exotic and a lot of these companies released like the SP compressor and the EP booster and the SL drive and kind of all of the different mini pedals that they had come out with. They were brilliant. They still sell well to this day. I think visually you see that they're small. I think practically they're not really that small comparatively to other pedals that just more efficiently use the spacing of the jacks in order to be able to butt pedals up against each other. Are there other things that we need to consider here, Grant, that we haven't considered? Okay.
We absolutely do. And the big point I want to bring out, and this is not a slight on you, the listener. This is a slight on probably all of us as human beings in the music industry. People don't necessarily buy a product because it logically makes sense. They buy because they feel like, or they have been convinced that this is a good idea. And that's where I think even if mini pedals don't save you space, or even if a new overdrive that's new and shiny and exciting is a TS9 in a new enclosure, it doesn't matter because we have already convinced ourselves that it makes sense to buy. And I think that's where, just because it's labeled a mini pedal and looks smaller is in certain scenarios is a good enough reason to make that purchase. So whether you save space or not might be a little bit irrelevant as far as whether people think they will save space or not.
Yeah. Yes. I think that
I hate to be a Debbie Downer here, but I feel like that's kind of marketing, as far as
it's definitely psychological. I'm not convinced though that like Exotic went into this saying like,
not at all.
We're gonna pull one over on these people. We're gonna make this pedal that looks really small, but actually is very big.
But I also don't think this episode, let's say all guitar players listen to it, which I hope one day they do. I don't think this episode would break the mini pedal industry.
No,
you know what I mean?
And I think that there's still practically people that are going to look at it and have like a but sort of reason
100%.
that they are going to use it. But I think beyond that, it does come down to how does it sound. And as you said, I can't think of off the top of my head if there is a normal pedal size effect that has a mini equivalent where people overwhelmingly report the mini one is superior. Like, obviously, in the case of the Exotic stuff, those only came out in mini. So there's not a comparison point for those. And those are all great pedals. But if you have a TS9 and then a Tube Screamer mini, I don't know.
Do you know which one comes to mind as the most, in my mind, quintessential mini pedal, been done incredibly well, is the Tumnus. I'd be curious of your thoughts. Okay.
I haven't played that. I haven't played the mini version, so I can't say. I think I've only played the full-size deluxe version.
Yeah, okay.
I thought you were going to say the worst one ever done was the Pog, because I think that was the
I was going to bring that
really
up today.
One.
I was going to bring that. And so for clarity, for the sake of terminology I'm about to use, the enclosures we've had on screen, which is the side-mounted jacks, one low, one high, I refer to those as a finger enclosure. You'd have to have a pretty chubby finger for it to be equivalent size. But so like a finger enclosure, the true mini pedal is, one thing we're talking about today. The one that Mason just referenced, there is the Micro Pog, which is the size roughly of a JHS double barrel, Bondi Effects sick as, that kind of size pedal. That's in a 1590
Just oriented in a vertical orientation
exactly.
as opposed to horizontal.
And then the Nano Pog is the same size as a Soul Food, which I have on screen. That's a 1590B. That's like your typical RC booster, kind of a similar size to the Vertex boost, like
MXR stuff.
Yep. So the Nano Pog uses different technology to get, or at least a different chipset and maybe algorithm to get the octave effect. And the Nano Pog, being the smaller, does not sound as good, and this is my opinion, does not sound as good as the Micro Pog being the bigger one. The bigger one sounds better. And I've had that from multiple customers unprompted, like my Nano Pog, I just can't get it to sound as good as my Micro. I was trying to save space and the sounds aren't there. And that has come up multiple times. And so there are, I do agree, not all pedals, their micro sizes don't necessarily sound the same, being the goal. A better, I don't think that's a fair goal, but sounding the same, I don't think so. But I would be curious on your thoughts, being a pedal manufacturer, Mason. Is my very unfounded feeling of, let's say a B size pedal, the Soul Food. Let's say EHX comes out with a Soul Food Mini, which maybe they have and I missed it. But a Soul Food versus a Soul Food Mini. Soul Food is through hole. Soul Food Mini is SMT. Is there any reason the Mini with the different component sizes but same circuit is going to sound worse than its bigger through hole equivalent?
It could sound different, which usually is considered worse because people just want it the same. but not by the consequence of it being surface mount. And I know that there are a lot of pervs out there, and I'm talking to you out there that believe that there is some sonic mysticism in through-hole parts. And I would say there is truth to that in very limited, in select parts that maybe there just isn't an equivalent of in a surface mount variety. But for the most part, surface mount is more consistent, tighter tolerance, lower noise.
Yep.
And typically the reason that you would have a difference in sound when going to a smaller mini size is that the care that was put into converting that circuit to a smaller size was not done properly or is not implemented properly. So it's not a component issue, it's an implementation and design issue. Because somebody who's really good at this will know parts of a circuit that maybe are going to be sensitive to where they're laid out. And so observing the same layout principles that were in the larger version where you can spread the components out more, let's say, because you have more surface area to work with. And if certain components have an interaction on the circuit board, that you can maintain those distances. You know, it's like if in an amplifier that you're converting to a PCB, if you know that certain lengths between certain stages result in a certain sound that you like, you want to make sure that you're capturing whatever that interaction is. And so I think that what happens and what people have seen are really poor jobs of somebody who is maybe a handmade, hand-wired pedal maker that converts to PCB, hire somebody that can do it but doesn't really know who to hire that can do the job properly, that actually understands high impedance interactions in pedals. Or they just wanted to do it as inexpensively as possible. And the person's like, yeah, I can convert that. And they kind of just put together a layout. And it's not enough just to match the components. You have to also know where things are going to matter based on where they're located on the circuit board. And usually those are the reasons why stuff doesn't sound the same. It's not because they're using these surface mount components. Like you can, again, get everything down to the nth degree and be able to make it fairly repeatable because of the tolerances. A lot of those through-hole parts are 15% or more tolerance, unit to unit. So you're sort of getting an amalgamation of a plus or minus, 15% tolerance in every pedal. And this is why if you put two clones even next to each other, there's some differences in how they sound and where the location of the knobs are. To get kind of achieve the same sound. And that would be the same way of tube screamers. That would be the same way as fill in the blank, a lot of classic pedals out there. No two sound exactly alike. So I think that usually if there's a difference in, again, mini pedals, long-winded way of saying this whole thing is that it's due to implementation, not by a consequence of the fact that they're surface mount.
And I would even invert it as well. Let's say you had someone that was amazing at doing circuits. Right now, we have John from Bondi Effects that helps us out with our circuits because he's amazing at this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And he's taking our older circuits. He's been working with us for a few years now to make our stuff better. And let's say let's say we did overdrives or something common like that. And we used to do all through hole on overdrives, which we don't actually make. But if someone got used to that overdrive sound as a through hole pedal, and then we have someone like John who is amazing at what they do with implementation and understands impedances and placements and components, all that, they are going to sound different. But if someone's used to the through hole and they notice that the new one doesn't sound like the old one, they are probably going to say the old one sounded better because that's what they're used to, even though they're now getting a more consistent, quieter, longer lasting, name all the pros to surface mount. But just because it sounds different, I think in our industry, if someone can pick a difference and they're used to the vintage, then nostalgically, my old one it just doesn't sound like that old one. It doesn't react to my amp quite the same way. But really, I don't think it's necessarily a fair argument. I think improvements have been made. But yeah, so I do think I have to say that I think a lot of my feelings towards mini pedals are, to repeat myself, unfounded, untested, and are just simply that. They are a feeling I have, and I know I'm wrong, but yet here I am still not buying mini pedals. And so I don't know if that's going to change in the future. I think I legitimately am going to get that. Was it BC 108, the MXR fuzz?
Yeah, the classic 108 fuzz.
Yeah. So I think like something like that would be great. And fuzzes is probably a great example because typically a fuzz is a pretty low parts count. So if you're going for a mini pedal, a fuzz or a lot of overdrives, the parts count is quite low in comparison to something that's like a DSP, digitally controlled, like something that needs a lot more parts, space between components, all that type of thing. I think this could be my dipping of my toes.
Well, I think
into
ironically, a fuzz would, even in a small enclosure, would be more sensitive, than other things because it's so high impedance. Whereas conversely, a DSP style pedal where it's all low impedance,
one main chip.
Yeah, like that would probably, short of just the number of components that is required to make it do what it does. Shrinking down the PCB, let's say parts per square inch, those are going to be way less sensitive than something like a fuzz face, where you need to be careful around, certain things and it's got the transistors and all that. But before we go further into this, I want to break for a moment to talk about two sponsors that make the show possible every single month. The first of which are our friends over at the Guitar Sanctuary. And they are one of the preeminent dealers in the middle of the USA, based in McKinney, Texas. And it is the shop of which Andy Timmons regularly attends, as we learned from one of our previous episodes, that Andy is constantly hanging out with Brian, get his pedal board constantly redone. You can pick up a lot of the items that Andy uses, including a lot of his new signature pedals, guitars and amps from Mesa Boogie, in addition to, I think he was using a Sir SL68 that sounded incredibly good on the stuff that he was playing a couple weeks ago. So all the great boutique stuff that you know and love, you can get there, including some of the pedals that we talked about today, including the Classic Fuzz. I know they're an MXR dealer. They're also a Vertex dealer and a Goodwood dealer. So check them out, theguitarsanctuary.com. They sell online. They sell in person. Check them out. They make and sell great stuff. Lastly, our friends over at Neural DSP are offering an exclusive discount to our listeners for any plugin on their website. You heard that right. Any plugin on their website. And you get 30% off using the coupon code Chairmen. This applies to anything there except for any new releases, and then those are available after 90 days for that very same discount. We've been using a lot of these for all sorts of things, including a recent interview that we did with Charlie Hunter, where we used the Corey Wong Clean Machine for the guitar side of his instrument, and we used the bass DI sound for the bass side of Charlie's instrument, because Charlie has bass and guitar on the same instrument at the same time. Really great sounding stuff. I really love what they're doing. You can also now edit your quad cortex if you have the standalone unit, which, you can basically get a lot of the great sounds from Neural already and then have it in its own sort of pedalboard based, kind of switcher based format. And you're able to edit that now on your computer, which is formerly something that you weren't able to do. Just makes the workflow a little bit easier. Really, really cool stuff. I can't wait to see what Neural is going to be coming out with here in the next year. Again, get 30% off any of their plugins by using the coupon code Chairman. And rumor has it, can't confirm or deny, that these might be available to have on your quad cortex in the near future. So I'm looking forward to that possibility. Let's get back to our discussion of mini pedals. Are there any other thoughts, Grant, that you think we should consider as it relates to mini pedals?
There is one mini pedal that I frequently get my customers to purchase for setups if they don't have one already, and that is a tuner. A mini tuner,
okay,
I find, because if you think of a typical tuner, not all tuners, typical tuner is usually going to be in a 90B, like Soul Food, like I have on screen if you're watching. That's a typical tuner size these days. And they are generally side jacks. Canvas by Walrus is the new one out that is top jacks. Mm-hmm. And I know that this is a manufacturing limitation. This was not them trying to be mean, but it has the top jacks, but then power on the side. And so it's going to, take up quite a bit of space, even with just that. And so, I think a mini tuner is really helpful. Other than that, I'm trying to think of other pedals that I often see that are minis. The Tumnus, like I mentioned, would be one of them, the mini Tumnus. But for the most part these days, it would be 1590B size, like the Vertex Boost. And if people are trying to save space, I was going to ask you this, what can people do to save space if they're out there to do it? It's usually, at least from my experience, the average size pedal, and they're just looking for top jacks. So input and output on the top short edge of the pedal with power right in the middle is, in my opinion, probably the easiest way to save space, other than just don't use as many pedals.
Yeah. Well, I think that the interesting thing about some of these top-mounted jacks is I think that sometimes there are sacrifices that are made in order to get them all on there, where they actually they do it, but they don't fit very well. So like one example that I can think of top jacks where things actually don't work that well is in the 10 series Ibanez stuff, like the TS10 or the Mostortion, because they align the DC almost next to where the input jack is, and then the output jack is like really far away. So you can easily use a right angle or pancake on the output jack, but because of how close the input jack and the DC jack are, you almost have to either use a right angle that doesn't extend beyond the plug, like kind of like the male section of the plug, or you have to use a straight connector. Because they're just too close to each other, and then they end up, either damaging the jacks or putting undue stress on them. The situation that I like best, and this is why I did it, like on our enclosures, and the Vertex Boost is slightly different because there is an 1/8" jack, but where you can put your right angles kind of like flared out left and right. And if you're watching this, I'll kind of explain it to you. If you're looking at the back of our pedals, the input and output jack are at the very bottom. And so you can kind of flare out your right angle jacks to the left and right. And, you can have kind of the cables feeding the subsequent pedals. And then the DC jack is up high. It is just above them. And this is cool because you can either have the DC jack go directly down in between them, or you can have it kind of come off to a side. And I tried a lot of different configurations of this to kind of, again, considering what it means as a rig builder, in order to facilitate sort of the best and most economical wiring schemes. Because again, I'll say this, and I've said it 1,000 times, most pedal builders, in fact, almost all pedal builders, are not rig builders. So they're not necessarily thinking of things in the context of what it means to put their pedal on a pedal board with 10 pedals before it and 10 pedals after it. They're just not thinking about that because that's not their world. Their world is, this is the pedal I'm creating. I'm doing everything that I can to create this pedal with the knowledge base that I have. Typically, that knowledge base doesn't include building thousands of rigs, which in the case of Brian and Grant, and for a time in my career, I was doing that stuff. And so I always think about that in terms of how that affects the end user who's actually putting this down on a pedal board. And so I found that to be the most economical way to make those jacks work to your advantage. Now, I'm sure that there are conditions where somebody's like, it would have been better if you inverted where the 1/4" jacks are versus where the DC is. And I'll tell you why I can't do that is because if you have a slanted enclosure, you have less room against, all the other things that it's going to hit as the pitch kind of starts to come to its vertice or its apex. So you have a lot less room there in order to be able to have things sticking out as the enclosure is starting to bend more. So it's definitely easier to fit a smaller jack, like a 9-volt DC jack, as opposed to a 1/4" in that higher position. But anything on that, Grant?
The thing I was going to say, the thing with the Vertex pedals that I really like is we've had to put the boost on quite a few boards. And if you're watching again, you'll hopefully be able to see this. But I have the evidence, VSP plugs kind of pointing almost vertically up, but slightly angled out. And then we have our like DC, kind of low profile DC jack there in the middle. But the thing I love about it is, of course, people want to plug in that 1/8 inch as well.
Yeah.
And we have these mini 1/8 inches that we use, and it can slot up right in between the power and the jack. And so we can like fully load the front end of this pedal without having to use any straight plugs. Because straight plugs in a tight rig for a rig builder is death. Like it just ruins everything. Yeah. And so, I can tell that someone that understands rig building and space saving thought out this layout, because a lot of times it just isn't. And it's really frustrating to try and have to, make these concessions where you really shouldn't have to. And so, I really do appreciate that it was well thought out in that way, and that there is nothing on the side. If there was a jack on the side, it would be so frustrating in this case for a tight layout. And of course, if you've ever built a rig for someone or put your own board together, the customer, the guitar player, always wants to fit one more pedal. And sometimes it literally comes down to a few millimeters of yes, it can happen, or no, it can't. And that can be one DC jack on the side of the pedal that makes the difference between it working or not. And so all this stuff, I know it sounds like we're being so nitpicky and precious guitar players can't fit his, one more pedal, but it really does make the difference of, sometimes of going over is it 50 pounds in the States for
pounds.
flights? Yeah. Going over the 50 pounds because you had to go over, you had to go up just one more board size, a few extra inches. But that few extra inches on the pedal board and in the case that it needs to fly in is going to be multiple pounds of extra weight. Yeah. And it can make all the difference. So this stuff really does matter if you're trying to fit that one more pedal on there. And so, it does make a big difference for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, those things add up, and it is a bummer when you see something that has top jacks, like again the Canvas, and then has to have the DC on the bottom. And there's been, it's not, I'd say it's less possible typically now than it was 10 years ago. But it used to be like if there was something like that, sometimes you could relocate the DC jack, or you would just parallel it, and you'd have like two options to get into the pedal. And I can remember doing that specifically. And actually, I used to do it quite a bit on wah pedals because some wah pedals would have the DC jack on the output side. And like if you had a lefty and they wanted it on that side, then it puts like the DC jack like right in the line of fire. Yep. And so I remember like on a lot of lefty pedal boards, and typically in wahs, there's quite a bit of space. We'd just drill out the other side, add a DC jack, and then just run wires off the existing jack so that you could go into either side and get power to it. Now with everything being mostly all PCB, it's harder to do that because there's less space inside, or the PC board will span the entire size of the available internal space of the enclosure. So you can't just start drilling and putting in other DC jacks. I'm sure it wouldn't work in the Canvas. I bet that thing's packed.
With that screen in there for sure.
Yeah. But yeah, I think it's that's a bummer. I mean, I'm trying to think of a workaround that I would do if I really didn't want to use it. I mean, I guess what you could do, this is crazy, but just tell me what you just follow me.
I'm ready.
Grant. So you grind down a section of the lip of the bottom of the enclosure, and if you, I don't know if you have one handy. I don't think I have one handy here. A Hammond enclosure, but there's a little lip on the bottom of the enclosure so that it fits together nicely when you go to close it, and so it's kind of like a ridge that helps keep the bottom in place.
But goes inside of the top part of the enclosure a little bit.
Yeah. And it's cast into the bottom of the enclosure. You would grind that down, right? And you would put potentially grinding a little section out of the main enclosure so that you could basically run like a pigtail wire out of it, so that you would just, again, still be tapping off of the DC jack, in parallel. It's parallel in it. But you would have an alternative way to be able to like have a thinner cable, get it so that it's on the top so you could smash it against something. I can't remember what pedal I did this for, but I did do this on a pedal. I remember once.
The big one for me was the ZVEX Super Hard-On. That one we always did a mod on. We either put a DC jack in it, or it would come with, like, customers would ship those battery clip to
because it didn't come with a DC. Because it didn't
2.1
come with a DC jack.
battery only. The at least the older ones, it was battery only. The newer ones are probably updated now, I assume. But yeah, the old ones
I just remember
were battery.
how many people, like, you know, because there's like, I think DC on the boost pot, so it always makes like a
crackle.
sound,
Okay,
yeah. But I think some of the early ones didn't have that on there. Like, it just was like, hey, I think my pot's dirty or whatever.
Yeah.
God, and because is that an SHO boost that's in that's on the box of rock pedals?
Good question. I can't remember if that's the Super Hard-On circuit on Switch 2.
The Super Hard-On circuit's got this crazy impedance. I think it's like 10 megs or something like that. It's like super high.
Wow.
And so yeah, I would unload the guitar like crazy, and you know, people loved it.
It's a great pedal. It's a classic. But
it's funny.
talk about tiny little
like
circuit boards.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that was a little
much.
one. Another one that was really little was the Love Pedal COT 50, the Church of Tone.
Is that what it actually stands for?
I believe that's what it stood for.
Okay, interesting.
Church of Tone, yeah. So there was a religious tinge to, you know, I don't know if you've ever been to the Church of Tone, but
not yet. Still on my way. I think it's in Tonetown. I've heard it's on 2nd Street. Yep.
Yeah, you can see the steeple from.
Yeah, I think the steeple was it a Marshall 412 slant cab, I think, is the steeple at the Church of Tone. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a big speaker baffle. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's the cross. It's just from a baffle.
Exactly.
Yeah, from a 412. But yeah, it's I think it was Church of Tone. It was like basically, especially the early ones. I think later on it went to a circuit board, because I think there was a time when John Cusack was making it. Who, you know, Cusack, I guess is it Cusack Music, Cusack Electronics? I'm not sure what the proper name of it is, but they did. They still do a ton of contract manufacturing.
Yeah.
But I think that they were because they're both in Michigan. I think Cusack's in Holland, Michigan, and I think that Love Pedal's like in Detroit or some suburb of Detroit. And so I think that they started doing their things for them. But early days, when it was hand wired, it was on like a little perf board that was like the size of a quarter. You know, everything was just stuffed on there
with a boutique price tag, I assume.
You know, I always thought they were pretty. I thought they were pretty affordable. Yeah, they're really high impedance, you know, and they're very sensitive to everything. And I think that they really sounded best on batteries. So most people that used them, you know, would use batteries. And the really early enclosures were like kind of these like Radio Shack hobby boxes that were folded metal enclosures, where it just had one screw in the front and one screw on the back of the clamshell. And,
no way.
And they were like flathead, you know, like machine
frustrating
screws with dome heads on them.
Breaking all sorts of rules there.
Yeah, it was old school. I mean, it was really old school, and like the powder coat was kind of funky, you know, on it, and the silk screening was kind of funky on it. It just had one knob. It was one knob in the truth, man. And it was kind of like, it was pretty bright, but it was like a nice kind of drive, just like a light drive, kind of organic drive sound. But you couldn't use a buffer with it. It really kind of needed to be like first, kind of like how a fuzz would be. But really cool.
Love it. Yeah. Love it. Mason, I'm curious, because we've been chatting about mini pedals being a space-saving tool, or are they, being the whole point of this episode. I'm curious if people actually did want to save space, what your thoughts would be and how you would advise them to do it. But before we get there, I'm going to go into an ad. partially because it's time, and the other partial bit of that is because I just sprung this on you, and I want to give you time to come up with the best tips anyone has ever heard of for saving space on their pedal board. So let's get into our two sponsors here, the last two of the episode that make this episode possible. We're so grateful for them. The first one is Mono. And Mono Creators, you can find them at monocreators.com. These guys are responsible for the best gig bags in the industry as far as like soft gig bags, double guitar, backpacks, soft pedal board bags for soft pedalboard bags for your pedalboard. But I still remember, I haven't told the story in a little bit, but I was forced to put my quite large mono pedalboard under a plane for a flight from Sydney to Vancouver. And I had been told I could, do it as carry-on. So I had it in a soft mono bag on a mono pedal board. It had like Timeline, Big Sky, bunch of overdrives because I needed pedals to actually make me sound good, back in the day. Couldn't do it by myself. And so I was forced to put it under the airplane. And of course, the whole flight over, like all 14, 15 hours of this flight, I was panicking. Like my board's going to show up, knobs broken off, all sorts of stuff broken, pedals all over the place. Sure enough, my pedal board shows up after being chucked under, perfect condition, in its mono soft bag. And I've been an evangelist ever since. And so I'm so grateful for these guys that they're on the show. I also want to tell you about their new power supplies. They have like more of a long rectangle shaped power supply that they now provide with high current outlets, fully isolated. Mason has one right on screen here. This is, if we're talking mini pedals, this is a mini shaped power supply that you actually can save space with because it's more the shape of a power strip if you are listening. And so you can slot this underneath your board. It's super low profile and is truly a great power supply. Mason, have you had a chance to kind of plug this thing in and use one yet?
Yeah, actually, I used one. I was kind of building a little board on one of our Travel Pluses, which is 20 by 11 and a half. And this is so low profile, I can actually stick it underneath and use it that way because, it doesn't have an IEC. On it, you're just coming in with, I forget the name of the
EIAJ.
It's as simple as that. That particular plug type, and so it actually saves a lot of room in the height. Because normally, if you're having to fit an IEC, you at least need to have a certain minimum amount of room for that, plus the PCB that it's mounted to. So these are super low profile. I haven't had any issues with it. I haven't done any extensive testing. But from what I can tell, if it's anything like the gig bags or anything else that Mono makes, they put a lot of care and time into things. And I love the profile. I love the weight. It's very lightweight, switch mode power supply. You can expand it, if you celebrate that. It's 500 milliamps for every output. They have 3 variable voltage outputs on this one. And they have various different sizes as well. I think this is one of the bigger ones, but they have a few others.
And if you do, as Mason said, if you celebrate what we've just talked about, you can celebrate even more with 10% off at monocreators.com using the code Chairmen, CHAIRMEN. Talking about celebrations, I also want to talk about BTPA. Brad at Bestronix, also known as BTPA.com, he is, in my mind, a human Rolodex of part numbers. You go to Brad and you say, I need this obscure part. The most recent one I was talking about is rewirable, custom-made USB cables for pedal boards. Like, does it get any more specific than that? It's like, yep, I got the parts. I'll send you over some samples and make sure you're happy with them. Sure enough, they're awesome. And so Brad has been so helpful to me personally. I know to Mason and also Brian that I have to also give a little bit of backstory. The sponsors that we have for the show, talking about Brad and BTPA, we only get sponsors that we already use and love and back. And so that's why we always speak so highly of Brad. I'm sure you guys are sick of hearing us gush over Brad at BTPA, but he is just that helpful. And they have the stock. They get it out the door quickly. And again, keep the celebrations coming. Use the code DACHAIRS, DACHAIRS, for 10% off of raw cable, plugs, connectors, obscure parts like I was just talking about, rack supplies, looms. BTPA is the place to go if you need pedalboard accessories. Check them out, btpa.com. Use the code DACHAIRS, DACHAARS. Now, speaking of obscure things for pedalboards,
and part numbers.
Tips.
Brad told me, by the way, the only animals, the only felines that he keeps in the shop are the Cat 5s. So just so you know. Lots of Cat 5s.
Lots of Cat 5.
It's basically like a rescue for
Cat
That's
5.
Good.
I like that. I've never heard that before.
Any sort of cat cables, he's got.
There's no parts called K9s, are there? I guess
No.
we can't do the dog equivalent. Yeah.
No.
Well, maybe I'll need to come up with a new part or something, and I'll name it a K9 just for that joke. It's worth it.
Yeah.
So if someone was coming to you saying, I need to pack as much as I possibly can on a pedal board, I have a couple space-saving tips in mind that I regularly use for builds. What about you? Like, what are you thinking if you're going for, let's say you're trying to do, let's put some parameters. You're trying to do something like a carry-on soft bag. You got your mono bag for the flight, and you can only do carry-on, but you got to fit a lot of pedals on this thing. What's your biggest space-saving tips for people?
I think the obvious one is building up. That's kind of the principal reasons why our pedal boards exist. And that's not to say that we're the first people that thought of it. There certainly were others that were before it. As Schmidt-Array comes to mind as kind of one of the early sort of adopters of that philosophy. I think the primary difference, again, speaking to size parameters and weight parameters, is just they're just so dang heavy. And they can't be shipped in their format. You have to ship them in a separate flight case. So you need like a flight case.
What are we talking about here? Sorry?
Schmidt-Array.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Specifically Schmidt-Array.
Yeah. And so I think where the big differentiators are is that ours are just way lighter weight because they're made out of aluminum.
And you can chuck them in a Pelican.
And you can put them in a Pelican, or you could put them in a soft case, where applicable. And so I think building up gives you a lot of options because you can stash power supplies, you can stash always on pedals, you can stash buffers, and then you can utilize, the front row for accessible pedals, the top row for accessible pedals, or if you have a switcher, then you can do a combination thereof. But I think functionally something that anybody could implement, there's a couple of tips that I'll use. Sometimes I will offset things based on using height as a way to do it. So not using a full-size pedal riser, but using maybe like an individual lift. Sometimes because of the way that jacks are oriented, when you try to go side by side, if the jacks are roughly in the same place, you don't have that option to offset them so that you can get them to kind of fit against the wall of each other's enclosure. So one way to facilitate that is sometimes by altering the height of certain pedals in order to allow them to have overlap. And I'm not talking about a significant amount. I'm talking about, half inch, something like that. I've used that as a way to do it. I've also just physically staggered pedals where maybe the foot switch location is not exactly the same as it goes down the line. But if there's a close enough gap where I can shift a pedal a half inch up or down and then be able to clear it so that I can go kind of like, wall to wall with a pedal, I'll do my best to try to make that happen, just to close the gaps wherever possible. I think the obvious other ones are like using low profile connectors, that really helps. So using, in my case, square plugs, or in Grant's case, they have their own proprietary plug, which are also very low profile. He's also experimenting, looks like, with the evidence stuff. I mean, all these are sort of all getting you to the same place. They're consolidating the space. They're limiting the amount of room that the physical plug takes up. Other space-saving measures that we implement. I think also trying to use, like in the old days when we would build pedal boards and there weren't as many cable options, you having to have really thick physical looms where, they just got sometimes too big, where you had to start separating power and audio from each other because there just wasn't enough room to really bundle it and secure it in a loom. This also took up a lot of space, especially in terms of the depth. And a lot of times if you're using thicker mounting bases or tie-down mounts, this could be too 2 inches plus of added depth to the overall pedal board because you needed to make space for these channels. I think that, going to Mogami, 2314 was a huge space saving thing. I tend to now use one larger anchor and then put power and audio in that same anchor, so long as there's no AC and it's just DC, because that's not going to be a noise issue. Those are the ones I'm thinking of off the top of my head. What about you, Grant? I feel like you've got some juicy ones that are your ace in the hole, so to speak.
I think what you said is great. Building up is really helpful. Depending on if you're using a switcher or if you have always on pedals. So an amp sim is a pretty typical always on pedal that, once you set it, you don't have to touch it. Sometimes for certain players, a compressor, certain overdrives or preamps stay on and don't need to be touched. You can get an angled board. So pedal train is angled, creation is elevation. Like there's 1,000,001 angled variations out there. You can get an angled board and you can mount a bunch of stuff underneath. If space is a huge priority for you, then just think like, what do I not need to touch? What is potentially MIDI controlled? What is in a loop in a switcher that you can turn on and off from the top but can live underneath? Power supplies can go under, like there's, assuming you have the right power supply, which we've covered at length in other episodes, what power supplies you can put under and which ones you can't near your audio path. So I think those are really good. If you are up for using dual lock, then you can actually hide a lot of cable channels or runs of cables. If you plan this out well, you can run cables underneath pedals rather than in between rows, which takes up a bit more space. And depending on the scenario or the context, that can save you space as well. And dual lock, to your point about raising pedals up slightly, you can double or even triple up dual lock to get height and make your own quick riser if you're in a pinch. And that can actually be a pretty easy space-saving trick as well. Low profile, yeah, absolutely. I think on top of what you said, those would be kind of my main ones. My last space-saving trick is not actually a space-saving trick, and people are not going to like this one, but the 80-20 rule, I think is very valid as well. If you have pedals on your board that you use 20% of the time or less, being a rough guide, ask yourself what it would look like to remove that pedal from your board and not actually use it. Just leave it at home and force yourself to come up with alternate options for pedals that are not really used all that often. Sometimes that'll work. Other times it won't. Please don't hate me. And then my last one is if you have anything passive, maybe a Ernie ball volume, or you have something that's easily powered off board, you could put the Ernie ball volume in a backpack and just give yourself a little patch point on the side of the board. And if you can get rid of a volume pedal, that's a significant space savings. Mm-hmm. And that's a depth very easy one. What's that? Yeah, depth and width, exactly. Yeah. So doing something off board, I think, is also easy ones to run off board would be external tap tempos, expression pedals. That's usually just one TRS cable, assuming it's passive. Volume pedals, that type of stuff is pretty easy to run off. I would also say wahs are pretty, I think I prefer them off board. One thing I'll say about wahs is that it is a little bit awkward to have to square up with your wah on a pedal board. It's not natural. It is a little unnatural because ordinarily, if I were using a wah separately from a pedal board, I would never have it, perfectly perpendicular, with like the edge of the board. You got to open up the hips, right? Yeah, keep those feet angled out. Penguin it. Yep. Yeah. And because I'm a big fan of the just keeping overall flexibility, although I don't necessarily adhere to any sort of flexibility regimen. Still I do think that it is definitely more natural to kind of have your wah at an angle, and so it's able to facilitate that in most wahs. Of the vintage variety, whether you're talking about Crybabies, a Clyde McCoy Vox, fill in the blank, these last a long time on a battery, like a long time. I mean, if you're unplugging the input jack, you should get 20 to 30 hours out of it, even if you're using a carbon battery, which is what I'd recommend on a vintage style wah. Those can last a pretty long time, and you won't get that hip fatigue
that many
We're
of
talking
us
longevity here, people.
We're talking longevity. We want you to be able to use your pedal boards into your 80s. So that's all I have to say about that.
I'd also say one more pro about running your wah off board. You can give the people what they want. And what I mean by that, you can move that wah front and center stage so that when you really want to rock it, you are right on the edge of the stage, close to the people, go and wah crazy. And then when it's over, click your wah off, walk back to your pedal board, back near the drummer or wherever it is, and just play some normal rhythm guitar. But having that option to really walk forward and scream up there, that's a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that where I really noticed the awkwardness of a wah, and this isn't everybody, and there's not like a lot of, outside of like rock and roll shows. I don't think I'm trying to think of any sort of worship context where I've heard wah. Can you think of any?
I've heard people do it. Whether or not it was done well is another thing entirely. That's really the question here. So yes, I have heard wah in worship.
So it was like one of the 55-year-old dads that was like filling in, who was in a Guns N' Roses cover band, and he's just like, yeah, let's do this.
Yeah. You know where you could use wah is if you just use a half-cocked wah, as in you aren't doing the waka waka waka.
You could use like almost like a filter sweep. Yeah.
You could do that for maybe an intro and then turn it off and then go into your normal, unfiltered guitar sound. You could absolutely get away with that if it was done tastefully. But I'm not hearing a whole lot of the back and forth.
I want to do like the Barry White kind of like, the romantic wah, like at a worship service, where you kind of like going down the strings really slowly, that could be a cool thing. That might be something people haven't heard before.
But I feel like wah, I don't know if this is being too crude here, Mason. We can edit it out if so. But wah can also be kind of, you don't want to make it overly sexual, especially in the worship context. You might be getting some, odd looks from the people you don't want to be getting. I will say, of any
pedal that's in existence, the wah has certainly been responsible for the most
many babies.
The most babies, definitely the wah.
Many babies.
The wah has sired countless numbers of children, and on that merit, no other pedal can take that away from them. So
no, never.
You heard it here, probably not first, but you definitely heard it here.
Whether you wanted to or not.
Yeah. I think that what I was going to say was where I see wah awkwardly is if you're a singer, because usually when you're coming up to a board with a wah, you kind of turn your body so that you are able to sort of simulate that angle. But if your mic is here, it is kind of like difficult to like keep that positioning. Yeah. And let's just talk about classic wah users. Jimi Hendrix, his wah was loose. There wasn't really a concept of a pedal board, I guess, at that time, but he was able to manipulate it in whatever position he needed to be in, equally with the expression pedal for his Univibe. So considerations, of classic use cases. I don't know if I have much else to say on the topic of mini pedals. We kind of covered the reason why mini maybe isn't so mini as we thought. We measured some things out. We gave you some specs that validated some of the things that we thought about. We gave you some space-saving techniques. Anything else that we want to complete with, Grant, for the day?
I would say if you are curious, I posted about this on Instagram a little while ago with Pedal Playground. If you're curious if your pedal combination actually will be space-saving, one of the tricks I have, and I'll try and use, my words as a visual picture here for those listening. But what you can do is measure out your plug, your physical plug, the length of it, let's say, and create on Pedal Playground, which is a website where you can mock up your layout with your specific pedals. You can actually put in your own pedal dimensions in there if your pedal isn't, actually in their list, which the list is gigantic these days. But you can make up your own pedal, and I put that in air quotes, but it's actually just your plug. So you can take the length of the plug and the width of that plug, and make a pedal in Pedal Playground. Place that beside each jack so you know roughly how much space that jack is going to take up, and see if your mini pedals are actually going to save you space or not in comparison to, the equivalent top jack pedal or whatever it is. And you can actually not take our word for it, but see if you can find out your own combination of pedals if you were looking for some new ones, and see if it'll actually save you space or not. And maybe it will, again, depending on your context, maybe it won't. But you can actually, prove it to yourself one way or another if it's actually going to work for you or not. But yeah, I think mini pedals, I still am a little bit on the fence for mini pedals as a whole, but again, for no good reason. So I'm looking forward to trying out that MXR BC 108.
Yeah, it's really good. I'll leave you with one other one that I think is actually better than the large size equivalent.
Okay.
It's the Dynacomp. So the Dynacomp equivalent, and I believe it's almost the exact same cast and knob placement. Okay. And I can't remember if it's attack or what the push button is. It might be attack. That one sounds better than the reissue Dynacomp and just whatever the production Dynacomp is that's available from MXR. And the guy that turned me on to this was not only Paul Jackson Jr., who used it on his pedal board. He actually uses two compressors. He uses an SP and a Dynacomp. That takes balls to use two. But the great Michael Thompson, another amazing session guitarist who is also a compressor evangelist, he also was the one that told me about it. I was like, that really can't be true. And so I bought one. I think they're like low $100 range new. I got it on Amazon.
Yeah, they're affordable. Hey. Yep.
And I compared it to a bunch of stuff, and I was like, yeah, like this really sounds good. Like this is, I have an original Dynacomp that's like a 76 or 77. And that one sounds amazing. But I will say that I had bought like 5, 6 of them to find one that was really good. And I remember hearing this story that Larry Carlton and Lee Rittenauer and all these like session guys in the 70s, when these pedals came out, they go to like Valley Arts, which is a guitar shop, and also had their own repairs where Paul Rivera was in Lutherie with Mike McGuire. Which is where Valley Arts guitars came from, where they would just open up like 10 boxes of Dynacomps, and there would be some that just had like the sheen, and then others that were kind of dull. And I got that, when I went to play them. This one sounds very close to my original one, more so than the reissue ones did. And it had that extra button, and I think it was attack again, like the speed of the attack. And I thought it sounded great. So I would say that was probably one of those few ones where it's like, yeah, this mini one was actually better in my opinion.
So it sounds like MXR has some gold in the mini market.
I mean, I'll say this about MXR. Most of the best engineers in our industry, a lot of them end up there.
Interesting.
Because they just have, I mean, it is a big business. It is a corporation that has all sorts of, has hands in a lot of different pots, and they just understand the manufacturing side, and I think they understand more than a lot of companies and have the resources to understand this, about how to optimize for converting classic circuits into smaller, more compact things. I know it's not, I know it's a big company, and so, sometimes they don't get maybe the same attention for their engineering feats, but I think that they do everything really well, and I have a lot of respect for the way that they respect the products that they're creating, and that they really put a lot of time and energy into making faithful reproductions that really match up to the originals.
Very cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Oh, I'm looking forward to trying a couple of these guys out.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I don't think I have anything else to add, Mason. I think we've covered the mini pedal, or at least our take on the mini pedal, and if it's actually going to save you space and tone and all that type of thing. But any closing thoughts for you?
No, I think you have a great week wherever you are in the world, and maybe we've given you some consideration for your mini pedals. And if you're going to go out and buy some, you heard a couple of good ones here between the Tumnus, the classic 108 Fuzz, and the mini Dynacomp, all great examples of mini pedals. And of course, I think it goes without saying that all those exotic pedals that came out, I mean, those are all still on tons of boards. So they did something right there.
And the Sonic Research Mini Strobo Tuner and the TC Mini Tuner, also good ones. There are some good minis out there.
Yeah, there are some good ones, but they are the exception, not the rule.
Yeah. Awesome.
All right.
See you guys.
Until next time.